He had spent years saying no to every woman who ever tried to love him, until one night, a stranger didn't even try. The city moved like it always did, restless, indifferent, glowing under the soft haze of streetlights reflecting off rain-slick pavement, but Ethan Cole barely noticed it anymore. His black sedan rolled smoothly down Fifth Avenue, engine quiet, glass tinted, a moving fortress that kept the world out and him untouched within it, and inside, his expression remained the same one he wore in boardrooms and penthouses alike, controlled, distant, unshaken, as if nothing outside that glass could reach him. As if nothing had in a very long time. Earlier that evening, he had walked away from yet another perfectly curated dinner, another woman chosen by someone who thought they understood him, her laughter still echoing faintly in his memory, polished and practiced, and he had declined her the same way he always did, polite, brief, final, because he had learned that connection came with expectations, and expectations came with disappointment, and he had no interest in repeating that cycle again. The driver slowed as traffic tightened near a quiet side street, rain beginning to fall in thin, steady lines, tapping lightly against the windshield, and Ethan's gaze drifted absent-mindedly toward the sidewalk, not searching, not expecting, until something broke the pattern. She didn't belong to the rhythm of the city, a girl, mid-20s maybe, walking alone under a flickering street lamp, her steps uneven, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding something together that was already falling apart, and even from a distance, even through glass and rain, there was something unmistakable in the way her shoulders trembled, in the way her head dipped forward, not hiding from the rain, but from something heavier. "Stop the car," Ethan said, his voice calm but sharper than usual, and the driver hesitated for half a second before easing the vehicle to the curb. Ethan didn't move right away, didn't open the door, didn't speak again. Just watched her as she slowed near the edge of the sidewalk, the dim light catching the edge of a worn apron still tied loosely around her waist, its fabric damp and creased, as if she had left work in a hurry, as if she hadn't even thought to take it off, and then she stopped completely, her hand lifting to her face, wiping quickly, unsuccessfully, because the tears didn't stop. Something about that moment felt wrong, out of place in a world he had spent years keeping perfectly ordered. He had seen people struggle before, employees, competitors, strangers, but always from a distance, always as numbers, outcomes, decisions. This wasn't that. This was raw, unfiltered, and inconveniently human. She took a step forward, then another, and suddenly faltered, catching herself against a cold metal railing, her fingers gripping it tightly as if the ground beneath her had shifted without warning, and for a brief second, she just stood there, breathing unevenly, trying to steady herself, whispering something too quiet to hear, something that sounded like reassurance but didn't quite convince even her. Ethan exhaled slowly, a tension forming in his chest that didn't belong there, that didn't follow logic, and before he could analyze it, before he could dismiss it the way he always dismissed anything emotional, he reached for the door handle. The rain hit him first, cool, immediate, real, as he stepped out onto the sidewalk, the world suddenly louder without the barrier of glass, the distant hum of traffic, the soft hiss of tires against wet asphalt, and her, just a few feet away now, unaware, still holding onto that railing like it was the only thing keeping her upright. He wasn't supposed to be here, not like this, not for someone he didn't know, not for a moment that didn't serve a purpose, and yet his feet moved anyway, slow, deliberate, closing the distance between them until he was standing just within reach, close enough to see the faint smudge of mascara beneath her eyes, the way her lips pressed together to stop them from trembling, close enough to realize that whatever had brought her here tonight had already taken more from her than she was willing to admit. "Hey," he said quietly, the word unfamiliar in his own voice, softer than anything he'd said all day, and she froze for a split second before turning toward him, startled, her eyes meeting his, guarded, tired, but still holding onto something fragile, something that hadn't broken completely yet, and for the first time in years, Ethan Cole didn't know what to say next. She blinked at him like she was trying to decide if he was real or just another passing shadow in a night that had already taken too much from her, her fingers still gripping the cold railing as if letting go might send her falling again, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the rain filling the silence between them with a steady rhythm that made everything feel suspended, fragile, temporary. "I am sorry," she said quickly, her voice uneven, already pulling herself back, already building walls. "I am fine, I just need a minute." But the way her words rushed out did not match the way her shoulders still trembled, and Ethan noticed that contradiction immediately, the difference between what people said and what they meant, something he had mastered in boardrooms but had never cared to question until now. He did not step closer, did not reach for her, just stayed where he was, hands relaxed at his sides, giving her space instead of control, something unfamiliar even to himself. And when she tried to straighten up, to release the railing and prove her point, her balance wavered again for a split second before she caught herself, a small, quiet stumble that said more than anything she had spoken. "You do not look fine," he said, not unkindly, just honest, and that seemed to catch her off guard more than anything else, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she was not used to being seen without performance, without expectation. She let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh but did not quite reach it, shaking her head as strands of damp hair clung to her face. "That makes two of us," she muttered, and then immediately looked away like she had said too much, like even that small truth was something she needed to take back. Ethan glanced briefly at the empty street, then at the car waiting a few yards away, its engine still running, the driver pretending not to watch, and for a second he considered leaving, walking back into the version of his life where moments like this did not exist, where everything was predictable and contained, but instead he looked back at her, noticing the thin fabric of her shirt soaked through, the faint outline of a name tag that had been hastily removed, the apron still tied at her waist like a piece of a life she had just been forced out of. "There is a coffee place still open around the corner," he said, his voice steady, offering something simple, something neutral. "It is warm, and it has seats." And she hesitated, not because she did not understand, but because she did, because accepting help always came with a cost somewhere down the line, and she had clearly paid enough already. "I do not have money," she said quietly, almost automatically, her guard shifting into practicality, and Ethan shook his head once, dismissing the concern as if it did not belong in the conversation. "I did not ask if you did," he replied. And there was no pressure in it, no insistence, just a statement that left the choice entirely with her. She studied him for a second longer, searching for something, an angle, a motive, a reason to say no, but whatever she expected to find did not quite match what she saw, and slowly, almost reluctantly, her grip on the railing loosened. She stepped away from it, testing her balance again, steadier this time, though still fragile, and wrapped her arms tighter around herself as the rain picked up slightly, the cold settling deeper into her skin. "Just coffee," she said finally, more to herself than to him, as if setting a boundary she could control, and Ethan nodded once, turning without another word, walking at a pace that matched hers instead of leading, something he had never done before, and as they moved down the quiet sidewalk together, neither of them noticed how the distance between two completely different worlds had already begun to close, not with grand gestures or declarations, but with something far simpler, far more dangerous to someone like him, a moment he had not planned, and a choice he could not undo. The bell above the cafe door gave a soft chime as they stepped inside, and the warmth hit her first, gentle but immediate, like something her body had almost forgotten how to accept, the scent of brewed coffee and baked bread wrapping around them in a quiet contrast to the cold rain outside, and for a moment she just stood there near the entrance, hesitant, like crossing that threshold meant more than just stepping into a different room. Ethan paused a few steps ahead, glancing back only briefly, not urging, not waiting in a way that demanded anything, just existing in that space until she moved again, and slowly she did, her shoes leaving faint damp marks on the tiled floor as she followed him to a small table by the window, far enough from the counter to feel private but close enough to the soft glow of light reflecting off the glass. She sat down carefully, hands still wrapped around herself before finally resting on the edge of the table, fingers slightly curled, as if unsure what to do when they were not holding onto something for balance. And when the server approached, Ethan ordered without hesitation, 2 coffees, one black, one with cream, and a small plate of something warm that she did not ask for and did not protest, because the truth was she had not eaten since early afternoon. "You do this often?" she asked after a moment, her voice steadier now but still carrying a trace of earlier strain, her eyes flicking toward him with quiet curiosity, and Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. "Do what?" he replied, genuinely unsure, and she gave a small shrug, glancing down at the table. "Stop your night for strangers who are clearly not having a great one," and there was a faint hint of skepticism in her tone, not unkind, just cautious, like she had learned to question kindness before accepting it. He leaned back slightly in his chair, considering the question longer than it probably required, because the honest answer was no, he did not do this, not ever, not like this, but instead he said, "Not often." which was true enough without explaining anything further, and she nodded slowly as if that answer confirmed something she already believed. The coffee arrived then, steam rising gently from the cups, and she wrapped her hands around the warmth instinctively, holding it close without drinking. Right away, her shoulders lowering just a fraction as the heat seeped into her fingers, and for the first time since he had seen her, she seemed to breathe a little easier. "Lily," she said after a moment, not looking at him when she spoke, as if offering her name was already a risk, and Ethan watched her quietly before responding. Ethan, keeping his tone simple, unadorned, nothing that hinted at anything beyond the man sitting across from her. "Thank you," she added, almost as an afterthought, and this time she did look at him, her expression softer but still guarded, and he nodded once, accepting it without turning it into something larger. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar, filled with small sounds, the hum of a refrigerator behind the counter, the distant hiss of the espresso machine, the rain tapping lightly against the window, and Lily finally took a sip of her coffee, her eyes closing for just a second as the warmth settled in, and when she opened them again, something had shifted, just slightly, like the edge of her exhaustion had softened enough for words to come through. "I got fired tonight," she said quietly, the sentence simple but heavy, and Ethan did not interrupt, did not react immediately, just let the words land the way they were meant to, and she let out a small breath, almost a laugh without humor. End of shift, no warning, no explanation that made sense. Her fingers tightening around the cup again. "I have worked there for 3 years, and there it was, not just frustration, but something deeper, something personal, something that felt like it had been taken from her without reason." Ethan's gaze sharpened slightly, not in judgment, but in attention, because for the first time that night, this was no longer just a moment he had stepped into, it was a story beginning to unfold, one he had not planned to hear but now could not ignore. And as Lily looked down at the table, her thumb brushing absent-mindedly against a small, crumpled piece of paper she had set beside her cup, something he had not noticed before, he realized that whatever had brought her to that street tonight was not just about losing a job, it was about something much harder to rebuild, and for reasons he could not yet explain, he was already too involved to walk away. She did not look up right away after saying it, like the words themselves had taken more out of her than she expected, her thumb still brushing over that small crumpled piece of paper beside her cup as if it carried something fragile she was not ready to lose, and Ethan followed the motion without asking, noticing how careful she was with it despite everything else falling apart around her. "They said I made a mistake," Lily continued after a moment, her voice quieter now, steadier but heavier. "A customer complained about a bill, said I overcharged him, and my manager did not even ask for my side." She let out a slow breath, shaking her head slightly. 3 years, and that is all it took, and there was no anger in her tone, not really, just a kind of disbelief that came when something you trusted turned out to be temporary all along. Ethan leaned forward just slightly, resting his forearms on the table, his attention fully on her now. "Did you?" he asked simply, not accusing, just precise, and she met his eyes for the first time since she started explaining, a flicker of something sharper passing through her expression. "No," she said without hesitation, the answer immediate, certain. "I double-check every bill, every time, I know what I am doing," and for a second, there was a glimpse of confidence there, of someone who took pride in what she did, someone who had built something small but solid in a life that had not given her many stable things. Ethan nodded once, accepting that answer without question, because it was not the kind of certainty people faked easily, and his gaze drifted briefly to the window, the rain still falling in soft, steady lines, before returning to her. "Then why would they let you go that quickly?" he asked, more to understand than to challenge, and Lily hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around the cup before she let it go, her eyes dropping back to that piece of paper again. "Because it was easier," she said finally, her voice almost flat now, stripped of emotion in a way that made it feel heavier. "The customer was loud, important, regular, the kind they do not want to lose." She paused, then added quietly, "And I am replaceable," and there it was, not just the reason, but the part that hurt the most, the part she had already accepted even if she did not want to. Ethan felt something shift again, something subtle but persistent, because he knew that kind of decision. He had made versions of it himself, not personally, not face-to-face like this, but through policies, through numbers, through systems that valued efficiency over fairness, and suddenly those decisions did not feel as distant as they once had. His eyes moved back to the paper beside her cup, and this time he gestured toward it lightly. "What is that?" he asked, not pushing, just curious, and Lily hesitated again, then slowly picked it up, smoothing it out carefully against the table as if restoring it mattered, revealing a small, rough sketch drawn in pen, lines slightly smudged but intentional, a simple drawing of a cozy cafe with wide windows and warm lights, something peaceful, something personal. It is stupid, she said quickly, almost defensively, as if she expected him to dismiss it, just something I do when it gets slow at work. But Ethan did not look away, did not smile politely or change the subject. He studied it for a moment longer than expected, taking in the details, the care behind something so small. And when he looked back at her, his expression had softened just slightly. It is not stupid, he said, and there was no exaggeration in it, no empty reassurance, just a simple acknowledgement that seemed to catch her off guard again, because she had clearly heard the opposite more than once. Lily looked down at the sketch, then back at him, uncertainty flickering across her face, like she was not sure whether to believe him or not. And in that quiet moment, with the rain outside and the warmth inside and two completely different lives sitting across from each other, something shifted again, not dramatic, not obvious, but real enough that neither of them could ignore it, even if they did not yet understand what it meant. The way she held the sketch told him everything he needed to know, not about the drawing itself but about what it represented, because people did not protect things that meant nothing, and Ethan found himself looking at it again, not as a casual observation but as something worth understanding, the soft lines, the warm light she had imagined, the kind of place that felt lived in rather than designed, and he realized it was not just a drawing. It was a version of a life she had not been allowed to reach yet. You drew this at work, he asked. His tone steady but more engaged now, and Lily gave a small nod, her fingers still smoothing the edges of the paper like it might fall apart if she stopped. On breaks, sometimes between tables, she said, her voice quieter again but not as fragile as before. It helps pass the time, she added quickly, as if downplaying it before it could be questioned, and Ethan tilted his head slightly, studying her reaction more than her words. Or it helps you remember something, he said, and that made her pause, her eyes lifting to meet his again, searching his expression like she was trying to figure out how much he actually saw. She hesitated, then let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. Maybe, she admitted, her voice softer now, less guarded. I always thought if I could save enough, I would open a place like that someday. She gestured lightly to the sketch, nothing big, just mine. And there was something different in her tone when she said that word. Something personal, something that carried both hope and the quiet understanding that it might never happen. Ethan leaned back slightly, absorbing that, because he had spent years building things that were larger than life, structures, companies, systems that moved thousands of people at once, but none of them had ever sounded like that. None of them had ever felt like something someone would draw on a piece of paper just to hold onto the idea of it. What stopped you? He asked, and the question was simple, but it landed heavier than expected, and Lily gave a small, almost amused shake of her head, though there was no real humor in it. Life, she said, the word carrying more weight than it should have. Rent, bills, my mom's medical appointments, you know, the usual things that do not leave room for dreams, and she tried to smile, but it did not quite reach her eyes this time. Ethan's gaze shifted slightly, thoughtful now, because that was not a world he lived in anymore, not one where choices were limited by things like that, and yet hearing her say it so plainly made it feel less abstract, less like something that happened to other people and more like something that existed right in front of him. The server returned briefly, setting down the small plate he had ordered earlier, something warm and simple, and Lily glanced at it before looking back at him, hesitation flickering again. You really did not have to do this, she said quietly, and Ethan shook his head once. I know, he replied, and there was something in the way he said it that made her stop questioning it, at least for now. She picked up a small piece of food, taking a careful bite, and for a moment, there was nothing but the quiet comfort of something warm, something steady, something that did not demand anything from her, and Ethan watched without making it obvious, noticing how even something small like that seemed to ground her, to pull her back from the edge she had been standing on earlier. So what happens now? He asked after a moment, his tone neutral but intentional, and Lily froze slightly, the question catching her off guard, because she had not let herself think that far ahead yet, not beyond the next hour, the next step, and she looked down at the table again, her fingers tracing the edge of the paper absent-mindedly. I find another job, she said slowly, like she was building the answer as she spoke it. I keep going, like everyone else does, and there was determination in her voice this time, quiet but real, the kind that did not need to be loud to exist. Ethan studied her for a second longer, recognizing something in that resilience, something he respected more than he expected to, and for the first time that night, he felt a shift not just in how he saw her, but in how he saw the situation itself, because this was no longer just about a girl having a bad night, it was about someone who had been pushed aside by a system he understood too well, and for reasons he had not yet fully admitted to himself, he was no longer willing to leave it that way. The question lingered between them longer than it should have, not because it was difficult, but because it opened a door neither of them had planned to walk through, and Ethan could see it in the way Lily held her cup a little tighter, like she was bracing herself for something she could not yet name. Outside, the rain softened into a steady drizzle, the city quieting just enough to make the cafe feel like a separate world. A place where time slowed down and decisions felt heavier than usual. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat, his mind already moving ahead, connecting details he had not intended to connect: the restaurant, the complaint, the manager, the way she described being dismissed so quickly, and something about it did not sit right, not just emotionally, but structurally, like a flaw in a system he knew too well. "What is the name of the place?" he asked, his tone still calm, but more focused now, and Lily hesitated for just a second before answering. "Westbrook Grill, on 8th. And the moment she said it, something in Ethan's expression changed, subtle but immediate, a flicker of recognition that he masked almost instantly, because he knew that name, not as a customer, but as an owner, one of many under a larger umbrella he rarely had to think about in detail. He leaned back slightly, his gaze steady, processing that realization without letting it show, because suddenly this was not just a story he was hearing, it was something connected to him, to decisions made far above her, far removed from nights like this. Lily noticed the brief pause, the shift she could not quite define, and her eyes narrowed slightly, curiosity mixing with caution again. "Why?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharper now. "You have heard of it?" And Ethan met her gaze, holding it just long enough to keep her attention without revealing too much. "Something like that," he replied, choosing his words carefully, because the truth would change everything, and he was not ready for that yet. She studied him for a moment longer, as if weighing whether to press further, but then she looked away, letting it go, at least for now, because she had bigger concerns than why a stranger recognized the name of a restaurant. "It does not matter," she said softly, more to herself than to him, her fingers returning to the edge of the sketch, tracing the lines absent-mindedly. They made their decision, and there was finality in her tone, the kind that came from someone who had learned not to expect things to be fixed. Ethan watched her for a second, then leaned forward slightly again, his voice lower now, more deliberate. "Decisions can be wrong," he said, and she let out a small breath, almost a sigh, shaking her head. "Maybe, but they still stand," she replied, her tone practical, grounded in a reality he was only beginning to step into. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence settling again, but this time it felt different, heavier with unspoken thoughts, and Ethan glanced briefly toward the window, then back at her, his mind already shifting into something more decisive, something he recognized from a different part of his life, the part that did not wait, that did not accept outcomes without questioning them. "Do you have anything that proves it?" he asked suddenly, and Lily looked up, caught off guard by the question. "Proves what?" she asked, and he held her gaze, steady, focused. "That you did not make the mistake they said you did." And she hesitated, her expression tightening slightly as she thought, replaying the moment in her mind, searching for something concrete, something she could hold on to, and then slowly, her eyes dropped to her bag resting beside the chair, her fingers moving toward it almost instinctively. She reached inside, pulling out a small folded receipt, smoothing it out on the table next to the sketch, her movements careful, deliberate. "I kept a copy," she said quietly, her voice carrying a mix of uncertainty and quiet resolve. "I always do, just in case." And Ethan looked at the paper, then back at her, and in that moment, something shifted again, but this time it was not just emotional, it was intentional, because for the first time that night, he was no longer just someone who had stopped to help, he was someone who had a choice to make, and the direction he was leaning toward was one that would change far more than either of them realized. The receipt lay between them like something fragile but undeniable, the ink slightly smudged from earlier contact with rain yet still clear enough to read, numbers aligned, totals correct, nothing out of place, and Ethan did not rush to touch it, did not immediately analyze it the way he would in any other situation. Instead he let his eyes move across it slowly, deliberately, taking in every detail while Lily watched him with a mixture of hope and hesitation she was trying not to show. "This is from tonight?" he asked, his voice calm but more precise now, and she nodded quickly, leaning forward just a little. "End of my shift. I printed a copy before I left. I always keep one when something feels off," she explained, her words coming a bit faster now, like she needed him to understand, like this small piece of paper was the only thing standing between her and being dismissed as careless. Ethan finally reached for it, lifting it gently, his fingers steady as he scanned the items. The timestamps, the adjustments, his mind shifting into a mode he knew well, one that processed information without emotion, without bias, and within seconds, he saw it, not a mistake from her, but a manual override, a price adjustment entered after the bill had already been finalized, something only a manager or someone with higher access could have done. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in recognition, because he had seen patterns like this before, small manipulations buried under routine operations, the kind that rarely surfaced unless someone went looking for them. "You did not make the error," he said, setting the receipt back down on the table, his tone firm now, no longer questioning, and Lily let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding, her shoulders dropping just a little as that validation settled in. "Even if it changed nothing yet, I know," she said softly, her voice steadier, stronger now that someone else had seen what she saw, "but it does not matter if they already decided I was the problem." And there was that wall again, the one built from experience, from knowing that being right did not always mean being heard. Ethan leaned back slightly, his gaze focused, his thoughts already moving beyond the table, beyond the cafe, connecting what he had just seen to something larger, something systemic, and for a moment, he was quiet, the kind of quiet that meant he was deciding something. Lily noticed it, the shift in him, the way his attention seemed to narrow, and she tilted her head slightly, studying him again. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her tone cautious but curious, and Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, not just at her situation, but at her, at the resilience she carried even when she was exhausted, at the way she held onto that sketch like it mattered, and he realized that walking away now would not just be ignoring a problem. It would be choosing not to fix something he had the power to change. "I am thinking," he said slowly, choosing each word with care, "that someone made a decision they should not have," and she gave a small, almost tired smile, shaking her head slightly. "That happens all the time," she replied, her voice grounded, practical. "People like me just deal with it and move on," and there was no bitterness in it, just acceptance, the kind that came from repetition. Ethan's expression did not change, but something behind it did, something more decisive, more intentional. "Maybe they should not have to," he said, and the simplicity of the statement made Lily pause, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to understand what he meant, because it sounded too easy, too different from the reality she knew. "You talk like it is that simple," she said quietly, her fingers brushing the edge of the receipt again, "but it is not," and Ethan held her gaze, steady, unwavering. "It is not simple," he agreed, "but that does not mean it stays wrong," and there was something in his voice now, something she had not heard before, not in him, not in anyone who had stepped into her life for a moment and then disappeared. The rain outside had nearly stopped, leaving behind a quiet, reflective stillness, and inside the cafe, the world felt like it was holding its breath for something that had not happened yet, something that was just beginning to take shape, because in that moment, without saying it outright, Ethan had crossed a line he had never crossed before, from observer to participant, from someone who avoided involvement to someone who was about to step directly into a problem that had his name written all over it, even if Lily did not know it yet. The quiet between them stretched just long enough for Lily to feel it again, that familiar pull to retreat, to fold everything back into something manageable, something smaller, and she reached for the receipt as if to put it away, as if closing that part of the night would make the rest easier to carry. But Ethan's voice stopped her before she could, calm but certain. "Keep it," he said, and she looked up, caught by the tone more than the words. Because it was not a suggestion, it was a decision spoken out loud. "Why?" she asked, her fingers still resting on the edge of the paper, and he held her gaze for a second before answering. "Because you are going to need it," and there was something in the way he said it that made her pause, something that did not match the usual empty reassurance people offered when they did not plan to follow through. She studied him again, more carefully this time, her earlier exhaustion now mixed with a growing curiosity she could not quite ignore. "You keep talking like this is not over," she said slowly, her voice cautious, "but it is. I already walked out, they already replaced me, that is how it works, and Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression composed, but there was a shift in his posture now, a quiet confidence that had not been there before. That is how it usually works, he corrected gently, and the distinction, small as it was, made her frown just slightly. What does that even mean? She asked, and for a moment, he did not answer, his eyes drifting briefly toward the window, the rain now reduced to faint drops sliding down the glass, the city beginning to move again outside, unaware of the decision forming inside this small cafe, when he looked back at her. His voice was lower, more deliberate. It means that sometimes the wrong decision gets reversed, he said, and Lily let out a soft breath, shaking her head, not dismissing him entirely, but not ready to believe it either. People like me do not get reversals, she replied, her tone steady, grounded in experience. We just get replaced, and there it was again, that quiet certainty built from repetition, from knowing exactly where she stood in a system that did not pause for individuals. Ethan did not argue with her, did not try to convince her with words alone, because he knew this was not something she would accept without proof, and for the first time that night, he reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, the motion simple but intentional, and Lily watched him, her expression tightening slightly as uncertainty crept back in. He unlocked the screen, his thumb moving with practiced precision, scrolling through contacts, pausing only briefly before selecting a name, and then he stood, not abruptly, but with purpose, stepping a few feet away from the table to give her space while still remaining within sight. Lily's eyes followed him, her mind trying to catch up with what was happening, because this was no longer just a conversation, it was something else entirely, something she could not quite define yet. Ethan lifted the phone to his ear, his posture shifting in a way that was almost imperceptible but unmistakable, the relaxed presence she had been speaking to replaced by something sharper, more authoritative, and when he spoke, his voice carried a tone she had not heard before, calm but commanding. I need you to pull the full transaction logs from Westbrook Grill, tonight's closing shift, he said, his words precise, leaving no room for misunderstanding, and Lily froze, her breath catching slightly as she realized this was not a casual call, not a favor between friends, but something structured, something official. There was a pause as the person on the other end responded, and Ethan listened briefly before continuing. Yes, immediately, he added, his tone unchanged, and flag any manual overrides after final billing, and Lily's grip tightened slightly on the edge of the table, her heart beginning to beat a little faster, because nothing about this felt normal anymore. Nothing about him felt like a stranger who had simply stopped to help. He ended the call after a few more seconds, lowering the phone and turning back toward her, and for a moment, the space between them felt different, charged with something unspoken, something that had been there all along but was only now beginning to surface. He walked back to the table, his expression composed again, but the shift had already happened, and Lily could feel it, even if she did not fully understand it yet. What did you just do? She asked, her voice quieter now, not afraid, but uncertain in a way she had not been before, and Ethan met her gaze, holding it steady, knowing that the line between what she believed and what was about to happen was about to disappear. I asked a question, he said simply, and the calmness of that answer only made it more unsettling, because deep down, Lily was starting to realize that whatever came next was no longer something she could walk away from, not because she was trapped, but because for the first time in a long time, something might actually change. The air between them felt different now, no longer just quiet but charged with something Lily could not ignore, her eyes fixed on Ethan as if trying to reconcile the man who had offered her coffee with the one who had just made that call, and for the first time that night, doubt shifted into something else, something sharper, something closer to realization. That was not just a question, she said slowly, her voice steady but quieter than before, and Ethan did not respond right away, his gaze holding hers, not avoiding, not deflecting, because he knew there was no point pretending anymore. Not after what she had just seen. The phone in his hand buzzed softly against his palm, breaking the moment, and he glanced down at the screen briefly before looking back up at her, his expression composed but more open now, like a line he had kept drawn for years had finally been crossed. No, he said simply, and the honesty in that single word landed heavier than anything else he could have added. Lily sat back slightly, her mind racing through everything that had happened in the past hour, the way he spoke, the way he noticed things, the way he acted without hesitation, and suddenly it all felt connected in a way that made her chest tighten just a little. Who are you? She asked, not demanding, but needing to understand, and Ethan exhaled slowly, as if acknowledging that there was no easy version of this answer. No way to say it without changing. Everything. My name is Ethan Cole, he said, his voice calm, measured, and Westbrook Grill is part of a group of restaurants I own, and the word settled between them, quiet but irreversible, and Lily stared at him, the meaning taking a second to fully register, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the table as the realization hit. You own it, she repeated softly, not quite a question, more like she was testing the weight of it. And Ethan nodded once, not adding anything else. Because he did not need to, she let out a small breath, looking down at the receipt, then back at him, her expression shifting again, not to gratitude, not to relief, but to something more complicated, something guarded. So this is what, she asked, her voice steady but distant now, you fixing a problem in one of your businesses, and there it was, the line drawn again, the space between them reappearing in a different form. And Ethan felt it immediately. No, he said, his tone firm but not defensive. This is me not ignoring something that should not have happened. And Lily shook her head slightly, a faint, tired smile touching her lips. It is the same thing, she replied. People like you can fix things whenever you want. People like me just deal with whatever you decide. And there was no anger in her words, just truth, the kind she had learned from experience. Ethan held her gaze, not looking away, not trying to soften what she said, because part of it was true, and he knew it. But he also knew something else, something that mattered more in this moment. Then let me decide differently, he said quietly, and the simplicity of that statement made her pause again, her eyes searching his, looking for something that would prove him wrong, something that would make it easier to dismiss him. But it was not there. His phone buzzed again, and this time he glanced down, reading the message quickly before setting it on the table between them, turning the screen slightly so she could see it, a series of transaction logs highlighted, timestamps, overrides, exactly what he had expected to find, and Lily leaned forward without meaning to, her eye scanning the details, her breath catching slightly as the truth she had already known was now laid out in a way that could not be denied. It was not you, Ethan said, his voice softer now, not because he needed to convince her, but because it mattered that she heard it again, and it is not going to stay this way. And for a moment, Lily just stared at the screen, at the proof, at the shift happening in front of her, and then she looked back at him, really looked this time, past the situation, past the power, at the man who had stepped out of his car in the rain for a stranger he did not know, and something inside her shifted too, not fully, not completely, but enough to make her question the certainty she had held onto for so long. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement like something new, something waiting, and inside the cafe, two lives that should have never crossed paths sat facing each other in a silence that was no longer empty, but full of possibility, because for the first time, this was not just about what had been taken from her, it was about what might finally be given back. And for Ethan, it was not just about fixing a mistake, it was about choosing something he had spent years avoiding, something real, something unplanned, something that began not with control, but with a single moment he had almost driven past, and now could never forget.